Hi everyone, like Maggie said, my name is Emily Bloom-Carlin and I'm a Senior Program Officer at the Preservation Compact. Like many of you know, the Compact is a policy collaborative housed at Community Investment Corporation, and for the past 15 years we've brought together all levels of government, nonprofit and for-profit developers, community-based organizations, lenders, civic groups, advocates, and other stakeholders to focus like a laser on preserving the Chicago region's stock of affordable rental housing, both the big A government subsidized stock and naturally occurring affordable housing. And as a quick note, when we talk about preserving affordable rental housing here today, we don't mean historic preservation. That's also great, but all we mean is keeping buildings in good condition and keeping rents affordable. And at the Compact, we do that by convening stakeholders to intervene directly to save at-risk properties, and also by developing tools and strategies to facilitate the preservation of our affordable rental housing stock. And I'm joined here today by Geoff Smith, the Executive Director of the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University, which is an applied research center that provides analysis and data to inform affordable housing policy and practice. And Geoff and I are going to do three things today. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the genesis of our research project and why we called it Breaking Up the NOAA Monolith. Then Geoff is going to give you a sneak preview of some really exciting data analysis work that he and his team at DePaul have done. And finally, I'm going to share some detail on the qualitative portion of this research project and set the stage for panels to come. And if we can do that in 15 minutes, Maggie is going to give me a gold star. So why do we care so much about NOAA, and what do we mean when we say that we want to break up the NOAA monolith? Well, as you heard from Ruby and Maggie, NOAA represents a huge part of our affordable housing stock here in the country. Subsidy for housing is scarce and limited, and most renters in need of low-cost housing live in market-rate buildings. And as a result, this part of the stock has always been a core concern of both the Preservation Compact and the Institute for Housing Studies. And what we know empirically is that the loss of NOAA makes the Chicago region's affordability crisis worse. And I think one thing that's really heartening for me, and I can only imagine is really exciting for folks who have been doing this work a lot longer than I have, is that there's a growing consensus on the national level, like Ruby said, that preserving NOAA is of critical importance to addressing our nation's affordable housing shortage. Right, not only do we not have enough affordable housing for all the people who need it, we're also losing what we already have. However, even here in Chicago, we know that preserving NOAA is complicated, in part because the term NOAA is just shorthand for habitable, low-cost, market-rate housing. So you can see three different NOAA buildings on my slide here, and you can tell just from this that NOAA is not a monolithic category, right? The size of NOAA buildings, where they're located, who they're owned by, and vitally, the ways that they're being lost varies enormously. Right? In some communities, we're losing NOAA when there's upward pressure on rents, like Ruby talked about. And I think this is the preservation challenge that we often talk the most about in this country. But in other communities, we're losing NOAA to disinvestment and poor physical conditions. And intuitively, given this, there is not a single silver bullet for preserving NOAA. What we've learned in Chicago is that we need lots of different strategies, and we need to target them to specific market conditions in order to successfully preserve NOAA. And you know, the one silver lining of having a diversity of housing affordability challenges here in Chicago is that we've developed a lot of specialized tools over the years to address different neighborhood conditions. Right? And my former boss, Geoff Markowski, who's in the audience today, used to always say, Chicago is like New York City smashed up against Detroit. And just from that alone, you can sort of envision that there are different strategies that will work differently in different markets, right? What might work in Detroit or what might work in New York City are really different. And so this is the fundamental intuition behind our project, right? Different communities face different affordability challenges, and Chicago's unique conditions make it sort of a lab for preservation strategies. But as you'll hear from our panelists later this morning, communities across the country have also been developing unique tools to address their unique challenges locally. And with that, so you know, just to say quickly, the enormity of this challenge means that we can't really go it alone, right? We need to learn from each other, and Geoff is going to show you some really exciting new ways to identify opportunities for collaboration across the country. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Geoff.
Yes, thanks Emily. Good morning everyone. Geoff Smith, Executive Director, Institute for Housing Studies at at DePaul University. Emily did a good job of kind of providing an overview of the project we worked on with the Preservation Compact over the past few years, funded by CZI. The goal was really to inform policy development and really connect local practitioners across the country, working in different market contexts to engage around the issue and share best practices around their work preserving naturally occurring affordable rental housing. The project had 3 components. Part 1 was data, right? We were trying to learn from what Emily highlighted in Chicago. We have 3 different types, lots of different market conditions in the city. Each of those market contexts point to different types of strategies. In conversations with national practitioners, we realized that this is true not just in Chicago, but across the country, and really to inform a broader national conversation on this topic, we thought it would be useful to highlight these different market contexts across the country. So that's part 1, developing a data analysis to highlight those different rental market conditions. Part 2 was really to use those typologies to engage practitioners in these different markets to understand what they've been doing to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. And then part 3 is to build out a resource that highlights those best practices. So to do that, on the IHS side, what we did was really dig into some nationally available data, primarily from the US Census, to create market typology focused on the MSA level, but using submarkets within those MSAs to create affinities or create market types or areas that had similar conditions that relate to the rental housing supply. We know that across the country, rental housing is found in different types of properties, so areas that have similar market rental supply conditions. Demand, we know that within MSAs, some areas have lots of renters, some areas have few renters, some areas have a lot of high income renters, low income renters, a mix, and we also know that those are changing over time. So really understanding how rental demand is changing over time, and then most importantly, affordability conditions. As these things change over time, how is that affecting the affordable supply? How is that affecting low-income renters who might be living in those neighborhoods as markets change? And how is that affecting actually the existence of low-income renters in those areas who might have had to move elsewhere because there was no existing rental supply? So I'm going to run through a series of maps. Hopefully you can read them. But just to orient you guys on how to interpret these maps, there's 2 dimensions here. Dimension number 1 is the big circles. And that reflects the number of low-income renters living in this particular market type in a given metropolitan area. And then the solid circle and the size of that circle reflects the share of low-income renters in that MSA living in that particular market type. So, and this is just looking at low and moderate income renters. So for this purpose, we looked at 80%. Renters earning 80% or less of the area median income. So this market type is really focused on historically disinvested communities. So these are, if you look at the map, you see that these are largely concentrated in the upper Midwest and in the Northeast. Areas like Providence, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Buffalo, Detroit have a significant share of low-income renters living in these market types, ranging from 39 to 52% of low-income renters living in these markets. So just how these markets characterized? So on the demand side, a lot of renters. So even though they may not make up a big portion of the total renters in the metropolitan area, within this market type, the renter rate is fairly high. High levels of very low income renters, and the renter population tends to be a bit older, and it's a predominantly black population of renters. On the supply side, you have a lot of older rental buildings that are more commonly found in 1 to 4 unit properties, and there has not been a lot of new investment or new development of rental properties in these neighborhoods. On the affordability side, you have higher levels of affordable rentals, so a lot of lower cost rentals. But the challenge is that despite that relative affordability, so significantly high levels of cost burden, so renters are still struggling, and these areas tend to have a higher level of subsidy programs active in these market types. Next slide is looking at what are traditionally considered higher cost or gentrifying neighborhoods. This market type tends to make up a fairly small share of the total renters in any given metropolitan area, but they tend to be, as you can see by the map, concentrated in certain parts of the country, and tend to be more concentrated in economically dynamic or growing metropolitan areas, but they tend to make up a fairly small share of low-income renters, partly because of the cost, partly because of displacement pressures that have happened over the past decade. But you can see areas like San Francisco, San Jose, Boston, Seattle, New York, Washington, D.C., anywhere from 22% to 36% of low-income renters live in this particular market type. And the kind of demand side of things, high level of renters, so a lot of renters, but increasingly high income, younger renters, and you see declines in lower income and older renters from this area. On the supply side, you have an older housing stock. These areas tend to be in the central city and tend to be in more established metropolitan areas. But there has been a lot of recent new development of larger multifamily buildings. On the affordability side, you don't have a lot of low-income renters necessarily because of the high cost and displacement pressures. So that is sort of an indicator that these markets are changing and becoming increasingly exclusive given the market context. So then, those are sort of the two traditional, I think, type of market types in Chicago, at least, that we think of when looking at affordability conditions. So broadening the scope a little bit, this is a market type that's really characterized by sort of urban, suburban communities, so almost inner ring suburbs. You can see that by the map, there are certain parts of the country where this market type actually accounts for a lot of low and moderate income renters. It tends to be common in places like Miami, where 80% of low income renters live in this market type, but also Los Angeles, San Jose, New York, and San Francisco. 50% or more of low income renters live in this particular market type. And so what you see here is it's a moderate rental level, so not as, the share of renters in this market type isn't necessarily as high as the previous two, but still significant. It's a fairly income and race and ethnically diverse market type, and you've seen increasingly high share of renters that are higher income. The renter populations tends to be middle age, and you've seen a decline in younger renters in this market type. On the supply side, you have a generally older rental housing stock, often found in 2 to 4 unit buildings or 50+ unit buildings. And I think for us, the defining characteristic of this market type is limited new development. So they tend to have an older housing stock, and you haven't seen a lot of new construction rental housing in this particular market type, which I think is part of the reason why you're seeing rising affordability pressures, high levels of cost burden, because of the limited lower cost rental supply. And you have a growing number of lower income renters living in higher cost or expensive units. And this particular market type, from the subsidy size, has higher share of housing choice voucher users, but not a lot of project-based affordable housing. This market type is sort of the flip side of the previous, where it's also sort of an urban-suburban mix of areas, but tends to be characterized by growth and more recent housing development. You can kind of see by the pattern on the map that these areas tend to be in the Sun Belt or in the areas that have seen recent population growth, recent rental housing growth. Areas with sort of the highest share of low-income renters living in these areas are Salt Lake City, Nashville, Portland, Sacramento, Houston, and Dallas, where almost 2/3 in some cases or more of the low-income renters in these areas are living in this particular market type. Again, sort of moderate level of renters, but renters are more likely to be young, moderate income, but you've seen recently a large drop in very low-income renters, given changing market characteristics. You've seen a lot of, the rental stock tends to be kind of mid-sized buildings, so this is sort of the 50 or less unit rental properties, mostly built post-World War II, but you've also seen a lot of new development of 50+ unit rental properties in these areas. These are all generally affordable, so if you look at sort of the affordability indicators, they tend to show relative affordability. But if you look at how it's changed over time, you've seen a sharp drop in affordability conditions in these areas, and particularly seen a large loss in the lower cost rental supply. You've seen an increase in lower income renters living in higher cost units. So even though it's currently affordable, the trends would indicate pressure on that low income renter side of the market. And then you're sort of getting into kind of increasingly getting out of the center city and into more of the suburban parts of Rita, where there are, in some cases, still a lot of low-income renters. In this case, these are high-cost suburbs that have limited rental options. So relatively low share of renter households and a relatively low share of low-income renters, but you see in some areas they still make up a particularly high share of low-income renters. So this is Las Vegas, Washington, D.C., Austin, Charlotte, Atlanta. Anywhere between 22 and 38% of low-income renters in these metropolitan areas are living in this particular market type. Generally, not a lot of renters. Renters tend to be middle-aged and higher income, predominantly white. The rental stock is more often found in single-family homes built between 1950 and 2000, but you have seen recent new development of larger rental properties. So there's a low, declining share of affordable rental housing in these areas, very few low-income renters, high levels of low income renters living in higher cost units, very little rental subsidy programs. So these areas are kind of like rental deserts in some cases, where you have to live in this type of market for whatever reason. You're going to be challenged to find affordable rental housing. And then finally, this is sort of both urban. It's largely a suburban market type, but you do see in smaller metropolitan areas these market types being captured in smaller, like central cities in some cases. So this area is moderate cost suburbs, also with limited rental options, but just tends to be a little bit more affordable, and these are common in places like Oklahoma City, Birmingham, Pittsburgh, Hartford, St. Louis. Again, low levels of rental demand. Renters tend to be older, low mod income, predominantly white. The rental stock is also typically found in single-family homes. We also see mobile homes increasingly in this market type, and you have very little rental housing found in larger buildings. And these areas tend to be affordable. If you look at sort of all the different market types, these areas have remained affordable. They are affordable, but just not very rental households in general. So the goal here, I'll pass it to Emily to kind of get into how we're going to connect this to different types of policy conversations.
Okay, thank you, Geoff. I'm seeing we're not going to get our gold star. It's both of us. So I want to talk a little bit about the next phase of this project, right, which was fundamentally driven by the core values that the Compact and IHS established at the outset, right? So first, and most importantly, we did not want to parachute into communities and tell them about their markets, right? This happens to us a lot in Chicago, and we feel really strongly that local folks know their community way better than we do. So we wanted to share this analysis with them, with folks who are practitioners on the ground, and frankly, have them tell us if it looked right, to make sure that we got it right, their community. And second, we wanted to use this analysis not just as a really fascinating sort of way to produce maps, but as a tool to drive intentional strategies and collaboration. Right, and so we spent the last year talking to a lot of people across the country. We started with our friends, and they said, oh, hey, have you heard of this cool model in this other city? And they said, when we talked to them, hey, have you heard about our folks, our colleagues in this other city? So we talked to people from all over the country. And so after sort of a year of interviews and other qualitative research, here's what we found, right? Well, first, and this probably won't surprise anyone, but there was widespread agreement from stakeholders in the communities that we talked to that NOAA is an important part of their local housing ecosystem. Their NOAA stock is facing preservation challenges, and those challenges look different not just from what we're seeing in Chicago, but those challenges vary across their market, right? So there's variation within MSAs and between MSAs. We also found that while MSAs varied in how far along they were on their sort of NOAA preservation journey, there are a lot of innovative models out there that have the potential to be really effective in other similar markets. We also heard from folks that we interviewed that they wanted more. A really common refrain when we told people about the goals of our project was, I've been saying that someone should do this for a long time, right? And finally, people want to learn about tried and tested strategies. They really want to connect with peers in other MSAs, and they wanted help with that matchmaking process. They were excited to learn from other cities, but weren't sure where to start, right? People are busy, and they don't want to waste time reinventing the wheel. I'm being played on the stage. And so, to sort of move along, Maggie will talk a lot more about this in the closing remarks, but this work resulted in a new repository of NOAA preservation strategies and the creation of a web tool. And I do want to shout out my incredible colleague, Cassidy Kramer, who many of you know. Cassidy spent the past year working really tirelessly to translate the qualitative analysis into a searchable database of tools that are categorized based on IHS's cluster analysis. It's a really amazing, wonderful work. And we're really excited to have some of the folks here today that have developed those tools and who have worked on those tools. And we're really excited to move into panels to hear more from them. And so with that, I'd like to invite Moha Thakur and the first panel to the stage. Moha is the Public Policy and Mid-Atlantic Initiatives Manager at the National Housing Trust, and we're really thrilled to have her as the moderator for our first panel.